Wait 1 second. We're live. Okay. Hello. No one is here, but this is for the benefit of the future people who watch this. We're about to start. Say hello, everybody. Wait, I know from previous experience that it makes loud noises.
Hi.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
Hi. All right. Let me just put this in a good place.
Make some move.
No. I'm just going to put it in a place where it can see the slide and it can see you. I think that should be fine. All right. Oh no, I should sit next to it, shouldn't I? Okay. Yeah, sorry. Please continue.
Shall I move?
Okay, yeah, I'll just stand here because of the slides.
Yeah.
Okay, so well, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I'm UCL Anthropology department, and what I'll present today is really very much work in progress, very raw. I have never presented it before. It's not even really, not sure it's 1 or 2 papers, but yeah, let's see where it will get us. Hopefully I will get some of your thoughts and feedback to think a bit more through the topic. So basically, what I'm interested in is memes, as the title already says, but maybe not so much memes as a kind of digital artifact that circulates online, but more as memes as a kind of cultural form that increasingly also has become somewhat autonomous from the original internet form that it was born as. And the way I want to go about it is by looking at 2 cases of ethnographic cases of young, very social media savvy youth who, in one way or another, increasingly perceive their cultural context and political context through the, you might say, through the affordances or through the kind of gaze of meme culture. And these are both post-socialist countries. They're not really related. My own specialization is in Armenia, where I've done most of my field work, and in the Armenian Diaspora. But now I'm currently also working together with someone writing a paper about Hungary, where I've also lived for many years. So it will be a bit of, I'll try to present the same idea slightly differently through these 2 cases. So the kind of key points that I want to explore is that meme cultures, as it were, increasingly give birth to a kind of mimetic gaze, which is not necessarily dependent on the digital devices, although it still indexes the online, like it still refers to the online cultures that originally were related to memes. So in the Armenian case, I'm looking at basically how young people from the diaspora, mostly from the US, when they come to Armenia, how they view the local world around them through kind of meme sensibilities, through kind of combination of ironic distanciation, So kind of parodic over-identification sometimes, through which they perceive the homeland as at the same time kind of intimate, and at the same time also as kind of exotic and spectacular. So that's the first case I'll run through, and second one is a bit closer to the title, more really concerned with the issue of liberalism very much, which is the case of Hungary, where the kind of increasing consolidation of the very far right, I would say, kind of post-truth conspiratorial propaganda regime is increasingly apprehended by liberal youth through again kind of mimetic irony and meme culture. Yeah, so I also prepared for the end like a few discussions, kind of questions for discussion, as none of this is really, it's really work in progress. So yeah, I don't really have ultimate answers yet, so it would be great to talk through them a bit. Yeah, just to start with, very quickly to kind of show like how I came to these two case studies. Basically, I was doing my PhD at the Central European University in Budapest, which is American funded, mostly by the Hungarian Jewish finance person, George Soros, who has become a kind of national enemy of the Hungarian state. So currently the university is actually in exile in Vienna because the government withdrew the rights for the university to issue diplomas. Some of you might have heard of it. So basically, that is kind of the context in which I was doing my PhD. Meanwhile, I was doing field work in Armenia and LA on digital culture and circulating images. And nowadays I'm working together with a colleague, friend of mine, Anastina Kallius from the University of Helsinki. We're writing now together a paper on the Hungarian case, which is provisionally titled "The Meme Radar," is the title of the paper to be. So yeah, I think what first is a kind of background. I think it's important to start to think about memes as also offline cultural forms rather than just something that happens on a screen or on a device. I mean, you could compare it, for example, to like something like, for example, Benedict Emerson, of course, when he's thinking about the nation state, he speaks about how certain media circulations also give birth to kind of new imaginaries, right? Such as the nation. So what I'm interested in is similarly what happens with memes when they like circulate, and what else do they give birth to? What do they materialize, and what kind of new way of looking at the world do they engender, maybe? So, so one, I think, quite increasing form that you can see is kind of material remediations of memes. I don't know if people are familiar with this woman yelling at cats meme, which I forgot which, if it was on Reddit or which other forum. This accidental juxtaposition of these two images went viral and became a very popular meme now.
That pumpkin is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so people really go out of their way, kind of also more and more. I mean, people will draw memes on their car if there's snow on their car. So in a situation like that, really no one needs to have their phone with them or something to live and experience and signify the kind of mimetic imaginary, which I think is one increasing way in which memes have become kind of autonomized from the digital platforms in which they emerged. Other form that I'm I would say even more interested in is how also sometimes quite spontaneously, like unexpected things become a meme. So I think you can compare it maybe to what in kind of religious imaginary is seen as spontaneous icons, like, oh, my tortilla has the face of Jesus, or my tomato has the name of Allah on it. This kind of thing. Sometimes it also happens with memes. So, for example, there was a very key moment that went absolutely viral in Hungary last year, which was when the government launched a new propaganda campaign for what's called the Action Plan for the Protection of the Family. So it was about like this poster we see here. It says like basically for pregnancy leave, we fund the young married couples, something like that. However, this stock photo led to much hilarity when people realized. Can anyone recognize this stock photo? No? Yeah.
You do?
Huh? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the same from the same series.
No! Oh my
as-
god!
uh,
Is it the same? Was there an advert?
Huh?
Like, it's literally the same campaign.
It's so the stock photo series, like you can just
Oh, I
buy
see.
photos from this series,
That's
but
so
the government
funny.
bought, like, for the protection of the family, they bought. The designer got this photo, so of course,
That's brilliant.
the combination with this traditional, that's revived the traditional family. This led to much hilarity, and instantly, like, anyone who would see this poster, this billboard, would perceive it as already a meme, as it
Right.
were.
That's so funny.
So yeah, those are just kind of two examples of why I think it's interesting to start thinking more along the lines of memes, also as a kind of way of seeing, and a way of that is a kind of disposition, maybe embodied disposition of being in the world. Yeah, just starting from my kind of Armenia and Armenian diaspora case. I actually started looking at Armenian memes not in Armenia, but rather in Los Angeles, because my fieldwork was kind of multi-sited, and there I in LA I discovered, like, I kind of recognized the Armenian memes as having been like similar to a lot of the memes that were created about various Slavic culture. So I don't know if anyone is familiar with this page. Has 1 million views. It's called Squatting Slavs in Tracksuits, which is all about kind of self-stereotypes about Slavic post-socialist peoples. And in Armenia, it looks quite similar. In the Armenian context in LA, so there's this very popular page called Armenian Memes, which in itself is already interesting because it's kind of a derogatory slur for Armenians, Armenian, but it has been appropriated as a kind of ironic self designation. And so a lot of these memes, they play around the kind of figure of what they would call a kind of fresh off the boat migrant who comes from Armenia, who doesn't integrate into US society, and who is kind of uncultured and also doesn't understand kind of civic virtues that come with a modern country, let's say. That's kind of the kind of tropes that circulate very much in this Armenian meme culture. Now, what is rather interesting is what happens when I was later doing my fieldwork in Yerevan in Armenia with like young diaspora people who came as volunteers or as kind of people on a kind of gap year, or who just move to kind of with this kind of developmental imaginary to help Armenia develop, very often from the mostly from the US and Western Europe, and their perception of Armenia when they arrive is often kind of it's kind of ambiguous, because on the one hand there is a kind of mythical homeland which is beautiful and mythical with various biblical mythology of Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark landed, and I don't know what. And on the other hand, there is the reality of a country that has been entirely devastated, still very much by the collapse of the Soviet Union and the economy that has never really recovered to having employment opportunities for the full population. So what I was interested in is to see kind of how these young diasporans, when they arrive, how they basically how their everyday lives, how they are also mediated by social media. What kind of images do they send to their relatives? What do they communicate with each other, like on Snapchat or Instagram, etc. Yeah, basically to see how social media also mediates this experience of coming from the diaspora to the homeland. And yeah, what is interesting is that a lot of the kind of self-deprecating kind of elements that you see in this kind of transnational meme culture also kind of emerge or get transformed in the kind of in crowds kind of memes that occur among these young diasporans. So, for example, there's a very common kind of catchphrase, which is both hashtag or also said a lot in everyday life among these volunteers when they encounter what kind of situations in Armenia, which is TIA, which is a reference to a Hollywood movie named Blood Diamond with Leonardo DiCaprio, which is about Sierra Leone, in which there is this kind of trope that Africa never changes, it's rough out there, etc. but this TIA, This is Africa, became re-signified by these diaspora volunteers as This is Armenia, and the kind of situations for which this is used and added to posts or said in everyday life, all very much kind of circulate around what one might call kind of consequences of the largely consequences of post-Soviet collapse, basically, kind of from the like sometimes it's can be kind of romanticizing the beauty of some Lada car in a landscape. Otherwise, it's when it comes to like this squatting young man, which is associated with kind of street subculture. It's kind of there's kind of ironic over-identification. Like they will, for example, they will imitate the way they speak in their videos that they record, or they will sit and squat to look like them. But they are kind of seen at the same time. Like these are not the people that they actually talk with. For example, they're kind of observed as a kind of exotic feature of the homeland. Yeah. So what is interesting is how, in a way, for these diaspora volunteers, the local population of Armenia becomes a meme, as it were, very much so. And there's also, for example, there's one of the things that is sometimes seen as kind of like typically cute Armenian, etc., is the fact that you can see, like, so often you can see people selling vegetables from the back of their cars. This is something that people will post, make photos of, post on Instagram. This is an example of it's a fashion brand named Ara Duret. Very nice things, including this pin of a Lada car with watermelons in the back of the car. So these are, I would say, kind of rematerializations of this. In this case, I would say more kind of Instagram gaze than me gaze, but there's both of that, because there's also one of the other pins is the Kim Kardashian, about whom there are many memes as well, because she's Armenian American. So a lot of it also is not just limited to necessarily to diaspora volunteers. There's also among the more kind of liberal-minded young Armenians who have been involved in various kinds of activism, etc. There is, I would say, there's also a kind of tendency to view certain figures in everyday life as a kind of meme. So a great example of this is this woman named Susanna Sargsyan, who is kind of wandering figure in the center of Yerevan, who usually shows up if there is like political protest. She will show up, and she will tell basically young people that, especially she will tell young women that it's that they shouldn't be out in the street, they shouldn't protest. This is not what a woman should do, and that she supports the now former government, but the kind of oligarchic regime that rules in Armenia. Yeah, this woman has been, people were taking like videos of her, and they were was circulating online as kind of meme on the street of Yerevan. And then in 2015, something really interesting happened, because this woman ended up managing to meet Kim Kardashian when Kim Kardashian came for the first time in her life to Armenia. She waited for hours outside the Marriott Hotel. Kim Kardashian had no idea who she is. Kim Kardashian doesn't speak Armenian also, so there was this very mimetic, say, clash of perceptions, local perceptions, diaspora perceptions. When they met and they hugged, photos appeared in the global press, and yeah, this made even more like explode the kind of meme potential of this elderly woman, to the extent that there is also now, for example, there's an app named Armoji, which has like kind of stickers, Armenian themed stickers, and she is also one of them. So yeah, basically she was always associated as someone very conservative, a kind of relic of a kind of Soviet mentality, who was corrupted and supporting corruption, and this kind of perceiving her through this mimetic gaze becomes very much a way for young people to, on the one hand, yeah, I think you could argue that there is a sense that it creates a kind of, it transforms what is backwardness into a kind of, at the same time, kind of cultural intimacy, what Michael Hertzfeld calls it. So this kind of rueful self-recognition, which is kind of like self-deprecating, but at the same time kind of folkloric, as it were. So yeah, through this kind of mimetic gaze, also the locals are, for these diasporans, on one hand, kept at a distance, but they're also celebrated at the same time as kind of iconic figures. And yeah, it shows pretty much which I think is a nice quote from the book by Limor Schiffman about memes, that we can treat them as a kind of postmodern folklore, through which norms and values are constructed, as kind of new kind of folkloric artifacts. So that was the Armenian part. Now I'd like to move to the slightly more dramatic, I think, Hungarian case, where, in the sense that there is more at stake, I would say, there than there is in perhaps in Armenia, which links back pretty much to. Yeah, I think here, what is interesting is how the state has created a kind of perfect landscape for a mimetic sensibility, because the Hungarian state is probably the most extreme propagandistic kind of, at least within definitely within the EU, but also within other post-socialist countries. I find it, well, okay, there might be a few in Central Asia, but for the most part, you will not find this level of propaganda. It's something really you have to have lived through to believe that it is real. So this, for example, so the main conspiracy theory that the Hungarian government has been pushing in the last years, let's say 2016, 17 roughly, has been centered around the figure of George Soros. So there's this trope that George is part of a shadow empire that seeks to destroy European nation states, the ethnic homogeneity, that he's paying people to come as refugees, to destroy the Hungarian culture, especially, of course. And this, yeah, the level is quite shocking. So just maybe as a brief illustration, there's one of the things that occurred in 2017, I think, was the national consultation on the Soros plan, George Soros. So that was this plan, this hypothetical conspiracy. Citizens were all handed out a leaflet whether they agree that the government should stop George Soros from bringing illegal immigrants to Hungary. And the videos that appeared on the state television were as followed, and just this one's translation.
Ő Soros György, a világ egyik legbefolyásosabb milliárdosa. Ez pedig Soros György veszélyes tervása. 1 millió bevándorló betelepítése évente, és 9 millió forint állami segély minden migránsnak. Ön mit gondol erről? Nemzeti konzultáció a Soros tervről. Ne hagyjuk szó nélkül. Készült Magyarország.
So, yeah. So, as you can imagine, yeah, not everyone agrees with this vision of the world. And mostly in Budapest, the capital, there is very much a tradition of more, you can say, more liberal or oppositionist way of thinking. And this has given birth to a kind of meme culture, which is quite similar to what some of the literature on post-socialism, from like Alexei Yurchak, if anyone has read it, in the sense that it doesn't overtly criticize the regime, but rather it kind of over-identifies with it. So rather than trying to distance explicitly yourself from this, basically by imitating it, you show how absurd it is. So, for example, here's a quote from the Prime Minister, the Hungarian Prime Minister, which is again, there are some quite anti-Semitic overtones. We are fighting an enemy that is different from us, not open but hiding, not straightforward but crafty, not honest but base, not national but international, does not believe in working but speculates with money, does not have its own homeland but feels it owns the whole world. So this is basically part of kind of discourse also of which started in 2014, which is that Hungarian is now has rejected the idea of liberal democracy and is building an alternative called illiberal democracy. And this has been kind of the most, say, kind of provocative trope that always in international appraisals of Hungary, there's this illiberal regime, etc. But this also led to, so combined with this George Soros discourse, this led to a thriving meme subculture, of which the most popular page is called illiberal memes. So yeah, here we see the Colonel Sanders from KFC as George Soros. And when interviewed in by Hungarian magazine ABG. The one of the administrators of the page also imitates the kind of conspiratorial state discourse. So there's this, basically the quote is, behind the page there stands a small migrant-friendly minority that serves the interests of none other than the great George Soros, thanks to the loads of paid likes that we already have 35,000 followers. So this is the idea that everyone who is against the government, according to the government, is being paid by George Soros to. So memes are also kind of playing with this discourse. So it links a bit to what Dominic Boyer and Alexei Yurchak in one article described as a condition of hyper-normalization, when there is a kind of extremely centralized production of discourse, completely standardized, that actually the literal criticism of it becomes less effective compared to actually excessively like identifying with the norm. So there's a lot of that, a lot of playing with that as well. But what is also there is kind of attempts very often in these meme pages. Very often what they do is they basically they compare the Orban regime to the socialist regime. So saying that basically this is not a democracy but a dictatorship. It's just like under communism, and through this kind of distanciation of comparing the present to the socialist past, kind of positioning itself as a kind of liberal minority that distance itself from both the liberal present-day government, but also from the socialist past, which is also seen as non-democratic. So here, for example, is which was kind of the idea behind the title today, Meme-tinted glasses. So meme from this liberal memes page, which reveals that Viktor Orban is actually the socialist era leader, János Kádár. And now what is for the kind of ethnographic context of this, I draw very much on the work of Anastina Kallius, who's a friend of whom we're currently writing about this. She has done field work for 1 year in a high school in Budapest, and kind of liberal high school where almost everyone who studies there plans to leave Hungary and go and study abroad after they finish. And for many of them also they come from kind of liberal background where parents were dissidents or during the socialist times, with high hopes for democracy after the transition. And basically what she discovered in her fieldwork is basically the social life of these memes in the high school. So like some of the students she worked with were like making their own memes in history class to explicitly compare what they were being taught about what an authoritarian regime is, how everyday propaganda worked under the socialist regime. They're basically making memes comparing all the time that make this comparison of the present day liberal regime with the socialist era, and in the process kind of position themselves as a liberal minority that is still in touch, that is able to see through the propaganda, that has still kind of commonsensical perception of the world. Yeah, so basically what we are interested in, and what we're now trying to conceptualize a bit, is how then, so also in the ethnography we have in the article, there's one moment, for instance, where clearly like students could already, while the teacher was explaining Hungarian history and speaking about the communist era dictator, already started laughing because they saw the meme without there actually being a meme, right? But they basically saw it as this meme, which is again this idea of memes as a kind of gaze rather than something that happens on the screen, rather kind of mediated perception, which increasingly grows autonomous from the devices, let's say. So to conclude, yeah, I think what is interesting, what I'm trying to wrap my head around it, is how memes become increasingly autonomous from digital platforms, and that maybe one new way or different way of looking at it than is done, for example, in more like rational analysis or whatever, is to look at them as kind of linked to kind of embodied dispositions of apprehending the world, as nowadays for more and more young people, the world as sensed is already a kind of potential, everything is already perceived as a kind of potential meme or story, or at least can be. So yeah, I'm not sure how well the Armenian-Hungary case really show the same thing, but what they do show is how, in a way, links to socialism, conservatism, liberalism, how kind of mimetic sensibility works to distance oneself from that. And okay, the last one I didn't really say, but yeah, I think one thing way of thinking about it is maybe also when we think about affordances of social media. I think these are the ones from Dana Boyd. I didn't quote, sorry. Scalability, replicability, shareability. That they also become in a way linked to the sensorium, that we already perceive things as scalable, replicable, shareable, which kind of predisposes the sensorium to see the world as new. Thank you.
I hope you don't think I wasn't on my phone. I was chatting to the people on the live stream.
Great.
There are currently 6 people there. Just so you know, they've been interacting. Thank you very much. Do you want to take a seat?
Yeah,
we might as well sit.
I wrote down this, but actually more interested in what questions you have. But you asked me to come up with something.
Yeah. Well, why don't you? I mean, feel free to. I never know where to put the laptop when we're in a circle. It's very awkward, isn't it?
That's the problem with
the
oppressive nature of the circle.
At the moment, you're on the screen.
Yeah.
But that's okay, maybe. What,
you
think we should
move it? Rotating.
I can, but we did that last time.
Like in a Chinese restaurant.
Yeah, and also it's loud on the table, so you have to like pick it up to turn it, which is really awkward. I'm just going to leave it where it is for now, but maybe.
We can invest in the technologies.
Yeah, just get a webcam like
big
this.
Money.
Thank you. I'm interested to know what questions you kind of are interested in hearing or discussing topics?
Well, yeah, basically this one thing. I mean, I think both of the cases that I presented come from a very particular, quite small group youth with in a particular setting, so, which predisposes them to have this very developed memetic.
Why are you standing up there?
Been sitting all day.
Okay.
You don't mind.
No, it's fine.
Just stretching.
I was thinking about that, and like, I guess you focused on a political content. And I'm not saying there isn't a difference, but once you divorce memes from their like technological or whatever, which is obviously a big part of it, the circulation.
So in that sense, maybe
Trump doing something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And for me, when people say he's a meme, I think it's because there are so many moments that you could turn into what I consider to be a meme, which is like an image or something, which is, I guess, a visual like thing. But maybe not everyone.
No, definitely. I mean, the technical properties of the cultural form do.
Question very well. I was deep in thought because I'm going my academic question. Is there a reason you're using gaze instead of lens?
No, it's a good question. Actually, I'm not now writing together with Armenian Gaze. We actually refer to it as a